Well, hello, everyone. This is our first public-facing meeting, and want to thank the task force for coming and joining today's meeting. My name is Nuria Rivera Vandermeide. I am the Deputy City Manager for the City of Austin, and just wanted to provide a quick welcome to all as we are starting this journey. I know we've got some instructions in this new format. We are having some folks interpret what we're saying in Spanish. And so there will be some instructions there as well. Hopefully I am trying to model that by speaking a little slower than I might normally. But I am going to, apart from just welcoming everybody, kick it off because we have a very packed agenda today, and kick it off to our two intrepid co-chair facilitators at the moment, or facilitators. They are going to walk us through a conversation about co-chairs, and then a really robust conversation about a timeline on history of race and policing, both nationally and here in Austin, that has been prepared by a subgroup of the task force. So without more, I will pass it on to Kelly and Maya.
Thank you, Nuria. My name is Kelly Coleman. I work in the equity office with the City of Austin, and I'm one of the co-facilitators this evening. I'll let Maya introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya, and I'm very honored to be joining y'all as a co-facilitator in this process. Once again, si necesita interpretación en español, por favor haga clic en el globo en la pantalla. We are going to start off, since this is our first meeting where we have live interpretation, with just a couple of reminders for those the task force members and those who will be speaking today. Please try to speak, as Nuria said, a little bit more slowly than you may be used to. Let's try to keep things concise. Spanish takes the same amount of content, takes longer to say in Spanish than in English. So you'll see that we'll be leaving some pauses just to make sure that our interpreters can catch up. And if you can, please do your best to avoid any acronyms. We are speaking about policing. We may use the acronym APD, that's fine. But other than that, please try to not use acronyms so that the interpreters can can correctly interpret. And I will kick it back over to Kelly. She's going to start us off with our group agreements.
Yes, and real quick before I do that, I just want to acknowledge and introduce our two liaisons for this. After we get our co-chairs, we have two staff who have so graciously been allowed, we're borrowing them to provide support to the co-chairs, and that's Jessica Coronado and Patricia Bournain, who I've worked with both of them and they're both amazing. So we wanted to acknowledge them too. About 2 meetings ago, we came up with a set of group agreements, and I just wanted to revisit them very quickly so we can get to it. The first of the agreements was respect, and we asked what that looked like for folks, and it boiled down to listening, right? So we want folks to really listen in this process. We like to respect people's time, right? We ask that people mute when you are not speaking. We also ask for time to process and take things back to our communities, to bring things back come back with decisions. We ask for consideration, right? Knowing that we may have priorities or pieces that might take longer in this process. We ask for understanding about some of the external pressures around this process. We asked for patience. We talked about brave space, right? That you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in this space. We talked about checking our past differences at the door or at the virtual door, right? We also talked about having healthy disagreements, like it's okay to disagree but we will be respectful in this space. We asked that we can challenge each other in healthy ways. There was an ask that we not take this personal, right? If there's something we disagree with. We wanted to be able to bring our whole selves into this space as well. We asked folks to make space, take space. So if you talk a lot, try to step back a little so others can speak and everyone can have a chance to participate. We also asked to center the people who are most directly affected in this process, right? That's very important. We asked about having language and justice-oriented content, or language justice content, and we're working on that with our interpreters right now. We asked folks to be authentic in their perspectives, and we also asked, or there was a statement at the end that said that hopefully this will change everything, and that it's not all for naught. And so with that, I think I will, we'd like for folks to also, before you speak in this space, to say your name and your organization. So when you unmute, say your name, organization, and then make your comment, unless we're in like a facilitated dialogue or conversation, if that makes sense, just so that we know who's talking. And the agenda today, we're going to try and make a decision about the co-chairs, and we'll have a little history, policing history timeline. And then hopefully if there's time, we can come up with some items for the next meeting's agenda. We might have to do that over a survey email if we run too long. So that's our agenda. And I'm gonna go ahead and share the list of folks who are who folks nominated to be in the running for the co-chairs. Real quick. And we're gonna give people a chance to say that they actually, whether they have time to do it or they want their name off, and give folks a quick chance to add a name if it's not currently on the list. Okay, so the first person is David Johnson. The second person is Farah Muscadin. We have Quincy Dunlap, Paula Rojas, Alicia Torres, Chris Harris, Nuria Rivera Vandermeid, and Brian Hooks are the choices. And so I'm going to ask now whether we have any additional nominations.
Kelly, we have some hands raised.
Okay.
Yeah, and Ella have their hands raised.
Can they type them in the chat?
There is no.
We don't have no chat.
This is not necessarily a nomination, and I think it goes. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Alicia, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Alicia. I am part of ICE Fuera de Austin. And my question, so it's a two-part question. There were some things that are not part of the agenda. I understand that there is a long presentation, but there's definitely some things that I wanted to bring up specifically now that this is a public forum. And maybe, yes, it can inform or they can be put on the next agenda, but I wanted to make sure that there was going to be a space to bring those up. Not sure maybe if it makes sense to do them after the nominations. So that was my first one. And so I don't know if we want to answer that now, because the other one, I wanted to bring up the fact that I think that we should, after thinking through, sitting with how much or what we are asking of folks to do to be as as co-chairs, I wanted to bring to the group the proposal for the co-chair nominations for folks also to have an alternative. I know we are only asking for 2 co-chairs, and so my proposal to the rest of the task force organization group members are that we also vote in an alternate. I don't think that it has to be something where we delay it. I think that we can. I am hoping that people would be open to choosing both the actual co-chair and the alternate from the folks that have been nominated. So I wanted to see if that would be possible today to agree on as task force members. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so maybe we can, so the process for this is going to be that I'm going to ask folks, if we have any more nominations, and then I'm going to ask folks if there's people who don't want to be on this list. And then Amanda Hasso is going to send a Google form survey to folks where people can check their email while we're in this meeting and answer who they want, vote on who they want to be the co-chairs, and we can pick the top 3 people. Does that make sense? So you have the 2 co-chairs, and then you have the 3rd alternate.
It does make sense to me. I guess it makes sense to me. I'm just and I am okay with that. I just wasn't aware that I thought we were gonna name them, vote, so that it would be recorded publicly. But if nobody else has objection to that, then it's fine too.
Okay. I do have an objection to a public vote, the same way I have an objection to a public meeting. I'm just voicing that now.
Okay. So we were trying to do this in I'm sorry.
There's a couple of people who are raising their hands. Ray and Nuria have their hands raised.
Oh, yes. Okay. Let's hear from Ray, and then we can hear from Nuria.
Good evening, Kelly. And this is really just a question for clarification from Alicia. We are identifying 2 co-chairs, and I was just wondering kind of what situation is Alicia interested in that we might have an alternate? Because generally I would think that with 2 co-chairs, that if one was absent, the other co-chair could certainly take the responsibility for a meeting. So I was just curious to see what Alicia's thoughts were around the need for an alternate.
Okay. Before, well, go ahead, Alicia. Do you want to respond real quick?
Yeah, I think I can just leave it at a simple.
Uh-oh.
Alicia, your video is frozen.
In email exchanges that happen between 2 people, and if one cannot do it, I think that we are asking a lot. I do want to highlight that co-chairs, it is not a paid position either. Some of the people that are up for that are volunteering or have been up for nominations are people that have full-time jobs outside of participating in this. And so I do think that it is more manageable when work like this is done in more decentralized community way. So more than anything is that being aware of the folks that are nominated, that this is not a full-time job for them, that they have a whole other, 40 plus hour job. And so just wanting to make sure that if we are making an ask, that they will have enough support feel that they are adequately supported.
That way it's never one person. Is everybody clear? on that? Having 2 co-chairs and 1 alternate.
Kate Grazzini has her hands up.
Okay, Kate?
Hi, yes, Kate Graziani with the Texas Harm Reduction Alliance. And to Alicia's point, I wanted to ask the group about the possibility of some sort of compensation for the co-chairs, understanding that it is a big responsibility and may be above and beyond a full-time job.
Appreciate that, Kate. Okay. Does anybody have anything to add to this piece of the conversation, or?
Madam Co-Facilitator, I think some of these conversations should not be handled in the public forum. I think the original group who usually meets, I would prefer, just for my taste, that we not have these conversations publicly about compensation and things like that. I would say that we table those kinds of conversations until the smaller group, the work group, meets. And then we report out on what's decided then.
Naria, did you still have a comment that you were next?
Sorry, I just wanted to, I wanted a clarification, and I think Ray got that clarification. I wanted to understand if what Alicia was saying is that whether or not there was a desire from the group, and I think the group should vote as a body to allow an alternate, understanding the reasonings Alicia brings, that if that is okay, then we would then be moving into a vote of 2 co-chairs and an alternate, but we should not assume that. We should put that vote to the group. In the perspective, I'm not hearing a lot of dissent, but we should put that to the group. I hear the comment about compensation, and I think because the city has many of these boards and commissions and other task force, remuneration is not something that we generally do, but I hear it, and I am happy to take that back for consideration. But I do not necessarily think, other than a recommendation, if the group wants to move that forward, that would be, that certainly could be a recommendation, but the city would have to take a look at that, in fairness to all our other boards and commissions.
When we say the group about the voting, Ms. Nuria, are we speaking of the panelists or the larger group of 133?
I apologize, Quincy. The only people who can speak and who can take a vote are task force members. Other folks in here who are participants are not queued to speak to this meeting. This is really a meeting right now for task force members. There will be, I assume, in the future, a place where this task force wants to take in public comment. This has not been such a meeting. This is really a vote right now for the task force.
Okay, so do we need to make a motion or take a vote on having the 3rd co-chair? Is what I heard from you, Nuria.
Just one more question, Madam Co-Chair. Is there a polling feature that we can use to take the vote so that it's accurately recorded?
So we tried that, Quincy. That's a great question. The only way that can work on Zoom is if we poll the audience. We can't just poll the panelists or the participants that are the task force members. So that was what we were going to do originally. And so now we're just going to do the email, and folks can fill it out real quick. And then we can move. Does that make sense?
Thank you for your grace, Madam Facilitator.
Of course. I was asking though, Nuria, do you think that we should take a vote to have?
I'm going to go back to the governance document. If we recall, the governance document sort of referred to Robert's rules, unless the will of the body changed that and wanted to modify that. And I just wanted to honor that we should hear from the group if that is the case, since we came in thinking of co-chairs. Happy to defer as we vote, but if there is a need or a desire to have a 3rd co-chair alternate, I think we should just vote on that, and then we can take 3 names as we move that forward.
Okay. So we would need a motion.
I make a motion to authorize everyone to vote on one alternate who can sub in as co-chair at any meeting if a co-chair can't attend.
Do we have,
This is Haley Easley. I second that motion.
okay. Hang with the second. All right. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
And can you turn on your videos and raise your hand so we can like actually count?
Aye.
I think maybe raising hands
Yeah.
or thumbs down, as I saw some people, either thumbs up or thumbs down.
Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16.
And I see
them
one no.
up.
Any abstentions?
17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So it looks like there's 21. It's unanimous and it passes.
It should not have been unanimous because I at least saw one thumbs down, but certainly the majority of folks.
Oh, was that whose thumb was down? Quincy?
Quincy?
Okay.
And hey, everyone, this is Amanda. And just to be clear, Kelly, I think everyone can still, they only have to choose 2 because the poll will, when the Google form tallies everything, what we can do is take the top 3 people, right?
Right. That was the idea so that we can keep the same process. This is a little bit difficult because I like my tech people on the same page as I have everyone else. So I have to skip around to count. But that's why we have Jessica and Patricia here too to help with that. So yay.
Hi, this is Valerie, the tech host again. If it's helpful, I will indicate on each member of the task force team the 2 initials TF in front of their name. And so that they will be indicated as though they are members of the task force. And I will do that.
Thank you, Val. Okay. So is there anyone that we need to add to the list of potential co-chairs? No, it sounds like. Is there anyone that we need to take off the list or that doesn't want to be on the list? Okay, so we're going to send the current list out right now and give people a moment to go into their emails and vote. Is that okay with everyone if we give folks about 3 to 5 minutes to go vote? Okay. All right.
And please raise your hand or indicate if you don't get the email. I think I got added everyone, but I just sent it out right now, so it might take a couple minutes.
This is Emily. I will note that it did go to my promotions folder, so if folks don't see it, you might want to check that.
Okay. Thanks, Emily.
And for the record, because even though this vote is taking place via email, it is taking place during the task force meeting, and therefore it has been sent to voting task force members who are currently present at this meeting today.
And just to reiterate, it says in the survey to vote for 2, but we are voting for 3. Yes.
No,
No.
no.
We're voting for, we're gonna choose 3, but we only get 2 votes.
Got you. Okay.
And then we'll choose the top 3. Yes.
Yeah.
I might have voted for 3, but I think it's going to be fine. Everything's fine.
We'll just count your first 2 on the list, Amanda.
I can actually, I think I can remove your response if you want to do it again.
Thanks, Amanda.
I'm sorry, but I also have that problem. Thank you.
So Amanda Hasso, can you send Emily and remove hers and send her another one, please?
I will. I think you can use the same link, I believe. Does it let you or no?
This is Alicia from Ice for the Austin. I also had the same issue, but I just did what you recommended, which is just resubmit another entry with just only 2 people, and it should work. Please let me know if I need to redo it or have a new link sent in to just choose 2 people.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, y'all are actually good. I can see when you've responded with 3 and I can just remove that response. Y'all are good.
Thank you.
Okay, and while Amanda is tallying that and finalizing that, is there anybody that attempted to vote and was not able to vote? Okay.
Okay. While we're waiting on that, is there anyone that wants to that was on the nomination list that has something that they want to share, that want to speak a moment about why they should be the co-chair? That was in the original document agenda that we voted on. So I just want to check in real quick before we move on.
Well, we already voted.
Yeah, we did. It was
Yeah,
it
I
was
think
on
it's
the original agenda, so I just thought I would ask in case.
a little late to make your pitch now,
Everybody.
sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's good to say that everyone on this task force has a commitment to really think through reimagining, or we wouldn't be here, right? And so
Yeah.
I think we're good.
So I don't see, sorry.
We must be missing.
Sorry, my dog started barking. I think I'm missing Kathy.
I voted.
Hey, Mitchell.
I voted. I can show you my
It's
receipt.
okay. I actually think I figured it out. Is it a Yahoo address?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kelly or Maya, I think you have access to it. Do you want to announce the top?
Sure. Let me check.
I have it.
Oh, you okay? Go ahead, Maya.
Okay, so our two co-chairs for the task force are Paula Rojas and Brian Oakes, and the alternate is Farah Muscadin. And so co-chairs will take over. Yeah, congratulations. And co-chairs will start with their duties after this meeting and will be leading with their duties at the next task force meeting.
Okay. Yay, we got it done. Okay. Now we're going to transition into the timeline activity. And Brian, I think you were going to share a little bit of context before we got started.
And I'm so sorry, Brian. I'm just going to jump in very quickly. Since we are still moving with Robert's Rules of Order, I would like to suggest if anyone would like to make a motion to suspend Robert's Rules of Order for the remainder of the meeting so that we don't have to follow the procedure in order to just have a facilitated open dialogue regarding this presentation. If that's something that the commission, that the task force is interested in, we can entertain a motion.
Happy to so move.
Yes.
I second.
All right. I'll say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, we're good. See, Maya's nice. She asked. I was just gonna do it. All right. Go ahead, Brian.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. For the public, I'm Brian Oakes, the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Austin, and I get the honor of introducing our team that's going to be presenting tonight on the history of policing and really sort of this exploration of history from both the national level, but also what that means for us as locally for the City of Austin. I think leading up to today, I got a lot of sort of comments from folks, asking the question, why are y'all talking about history? And why are you all spending this amount of time as a task force to really do this exploration of history? And it makes me think of a Maya Angelou quote where she says, I have a great respect for the past. If you don't know where you've come from, then you don't know where you're going. And that's really how timely this is for us. And so as we start on this journey to reimagine public safety, it's important for us to know how we got to this point in time. And this history of policing timeline that we're going to share tonight is prepared by our working group, and we're really excited to share it with you. The timeline seeks to tell the history of policing through the eyes of those in our community that have been most negatively impacted and have experienced harm at the hands of this history. It's our hope that this timeline can also ground the task force, city staff, community members in the context of systemic racism within our nation, including the city of Austin itself. Tonight, we'll review 4 sort of key eras of history. And as we go on this journey through history, we will pause at times to reflect on what you've heard and read. At the end of tonight, I want everyone to really think about what's the next vision for us as we reimagine public safety. How do we take this history to create something that's new? What story will we be able to tell about how we change the course of history for our community? And what values will guide us along the way? So without further delay, I'd like to give the floor to our first working group member that is going to start us off on this journey. I'll hand it over to Emily Garrett to get us started on the first era of policing that we'll explore tonight.
Great, thank you so much. Emily Garrick from the Texas Fair Defense Project. Do we have the screen share for the timeline set up?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Give me one moment.
This is Valerie again. We have Alicia Torres with her hand up. I'm not sure if that has been up or if it's newly raised.
He has a comment. Can you share while we get the timeline up, Alicia?
Yes, in the essence of time, I definitely will try to be fast. I think that this is, well, first of all, as a member of the task force that didn't actively do work in this, I want to acknowledge all the people that did put a lot of work on this. This is Alicia from Ice for the Austin. I think that it is really important that we are grounded. There's a lot of responsibility, and we are here showing up as the community. And so I really am appreciative that this is something that I haven't seen done in other commissions or in other task forces a lot. And so this is really exciting in the sense that it does have a feeling that it is, we are trying to do things differently, right? And so really grounding ourselves in historical context as to where we're going, I think it feels very grounding. And so the things that I wanted, we'll call them housekeeping things that I wanted to name. I am not expecting a full discussion on them, but I do think it's important, especially because it is now a public forum. I know that although Zoom is really easy, or Zoom is readily accessible for a lot of us, it is something that specifically with folks that are still work in Austin and might be living in the more rural areas, internet is not accessible that way from home, and sometimes the phones don't allow for the download of the Zoom application. So Facebook is the way that I specifically, with the community of Ice for the Austin, we engage with. And so I'm really hoping that by next meeting, November 5th, we are able to live stream through Facebook. I know it is something that the community, that the city has done with other things. And so I just want to highlight that we are, as Ice for the Austin, we are hoping that we are able to live stream the next meeting via Facebook in the essence of making this accessible to the larger community. I also wanted to highlight that I understand that there is a Reimagining public safety survey that some council members have used in the district town halls. And it currently resides under the Reimagining Task Force website. However, as a member of the task force myself, I was not aware that survey was being developed or who it was developed by. And after reading it, taking it myself and reading some of the questions, I wanted to highlight that there is some accessibility issues around the language, and some of the tone I think is really limiting in the reimagining part. So I wanted to highlight and bring up that I would like to further discuss that. I think I want more information as to who developed it and how it is being used and the accessibility of it. So the task force, and then also want to highlight to the larger community that the numbers that this task force has been working with, as far as being available currently under the Reimagining Fund and the Decoupling Fund. As task force members, we have updated numbers, and I think it is important that at large we are aware that we are currently will be working as a task force with a combined 7.1 million difference from the original numbers that were given out. I know that might sound a little bit heavy on technicalities for maybe some folks that are joining us and haven't followed those conversations, the budget ones, but definitely I just want to put it out in the public sphere that we do receive updates, and as task force, as a member of the task force, I do feel the urge to provide full transparency and alert folks that we're working with different numbers that were originally presented. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. So real quick before we move forward, we will have the Facebook Live text set up by the next meeting, or a way for people to join that way. We just wanted to make sure that we could respond to the comments that were made, and so that we wouldn't leave things hanging or lingering. And then also just to say real quick that everything you just said will hopefully the co-chairs were listening, and will provide support to them to help craft that into the next agenda. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Maya, do you want to share your screen and try to make it as big as you can so people can see it? And folks, if it's easier, you can move that little white line in between the where you see us in the Zoom and where you see the timeline to make the timeline piece bigger and easier to read for people who don't normally use Zoom a lot.
Is that readable for y'all? Okay, thank you.
All right.
So and you can also see the timeline on the Reimagining website.
And it will be available in Spanish as soon as it's translated as well.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm Emily Garrett from the Texas Fair Defense Project. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have 4 sections of this timeline. I just want to note that we are not going to be able to cover every item on the timeline. So we're just going to be selecting key dates from this selection of key dates. I'm going to be talking about the first era and about how law enforcement worked and what laws they were enforcing before the formation of police departments, both preceding the founding of the United States and up until the 1800s. And during this era, there were 4 primary policing entities. First, sheriffs and constables, then civilian watches, slave patrols, and rangers. The sheriff is largely considered to be the first law enforcement agency and was first established in England in the 1100s to act as tax collectors and to replace private security guards to protect private property. During the same time period, there were civilian night watches, which were used in Europe and the colonies. And the colonization of America began, as we all know, in 1492. And during this time period, there were brutal military force that was used to dispossess indigenous people of their land and force them into slavery, working in mines and agriculture. There were also enslaving raids by British colonists across what are now many southern states during this time period, but the white settlers felt that they needed more forced labor than this could provide. And this brings us to the Transatlantic slave trade, which lasted from 1526 to 1867. And approximately 12.5 million people were shipped from Africa. And of those, 10.7 million were forcibly brought to the Americas. this forced migration was extremely deadly, with approximately 2 million people dying during the voyage and millions more dying in what were known as seasoning camps upon arrival. The death rates at these seasoning camps were as high as 50%. There was also indentured servitude during this time period in the 1600s, and both Black and white people could be indentured servants, though it was not equal. In the 1600s, it was a custom to make Africans who had been baptized. In the early 1600s, it was a custom to make Africans who had been baptized before their arrival to the colonies indentured servants instead of slaves. But the institutionalization of slavery was soon to follow. The first court ruling upholding slavery was in 1640 by a Virginia court, and the first law passed regarding slavery was in Massachusetts colony in 1641. And chattel slavery was really formalized by the Virginia colony, which passed a law in 1662 stating that any child whose mother was enslaved was also a slave, and then passed a law in 1705 declaring that slaves were real estate and legally protecting forced breeding. Race was a really explicit factor in law enforcement throughout the colonies, regardless of status as a free or enslaved person. In 1703, Boston passed a curfew law for all Black and Indigenous peoples, including free Black people. And during the early years of the United States as a nation state, Southern cities formed paramilitary groups that were tasked with the control of enslaved people with the goal of preventing and repressing slave rebellions. And these slave patrols often worked with white civilian militias, serving as early law enforcement. In 1790, the Naturalization Act was passed, which restricted citizenship to white men.
Emily, real quick, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can you slow down just a tad?
Yes, I'm sorry.
For our interpreters?
Of course.
Yes, thank you.
So I was just saying that in 1790, the Naturalization Act was passed, which restricted citizenship to white men. In the early 1800s, laws in several southern states were passed requiring all Black people to carry passes and allowing for the arrest of any Black person without a pass, regardless of their status. In 1823, the Texas Rangers were formed, and they are widely considered to be the first state police agency. They were created for the express purpose of protecting the land that white settlers had taken from the Comanches. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which legalized the removal of all Indigenous people east of the Mississippi to lands west of the river. In total, more than 46,000 Native Americans were forcibly removed from the southeastern United States in order to create space for white settlement. In 1840, Austin elected its first city marshal, and it passed ordinances for that city marshal to enforce that established a 10 p.m. curfew for slaves and forbidding any white man or any Mexican from, quote, making associates of Negroes. In 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Law. This required that slaves be returned to their owners, even if they were in a free state. The act also made the federal law enforcement, the federal marshals, responsible for finding, returning, and trying any escaped slaves. And they could also enlist the assistance of other white people. It also made it possible for any Black person to be captured as a slave solely on the basis of a sworn statement from a white person, with no right to challenge that statement in court to prove that they were in fact free. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Chris for the political era.
Thank you, Emily. So this era, we see culminate in the coalescence of law enforcement from guards and watchmen and militias and slave patrols into something more similar that we have today. But the era itself sees, especially in Texas, which I'll mostly be focusing on, the establishment and expansion of local police. And with that, the expansion of laws designed to control mostly those folks that are enslaved, but increasingly those also that are other, including Mexicans and immigrants. So in 1846, Texas statehood, we have the first state-funded local policing apparatus, which are slave patrols. These are, again, the earliest instance of security personnel using, quote, patrol tactics through their scope, though their scope of authority was limited to capturing slaves. In 1848, the city of Austin made it illegal for a slave owner to allow an enslaved person to hire their own time or, quote, act or deal as a free person. In 1854, you have something called Vigilance Committees. The mayor, newspaper publisher, state senator, and former Texas Ranger, John Salmon Rip Ford, he was all those things, established a Vigilance Committee to drive Latinos out of Austin, fearing solidarity with enslaved people would spark rebellion against white supremacy. In 1859, we see an Austin city ordinance was passed that prevented enslaved peoples from living separately from their owners. In 1860, fear of a slave revolt spread across the city of Austin such that the mayor responded by ordering the examination of all slave quarters. In 1861, you see Texas secede from the Union, join the rebellion. As part of their declaration, they said, and I quote, "She was received as a commonwealth holding, maintaining, and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of the African to the white race within her limits, a relation that had existed from the first settlement of her wilderness by the white race, and which her people intended should exist in all future time." Their secession was about slavery 100%. In 1865, following the Civil War, we start seeing the emancipation of enslaved people. That emancipation was followed immediately by the passage of laws controlling Black people's public movement and work. Emancipation also stipulated that slave labor could continue for those convicted of a crime, creating an incentive for whites to empowered to arrest Black people in order to exploit their labor and put them right back into an enslaved status. Convict leasing, one form of this, was not abolished until 1941, and obviously prison labor continues to exist to this day. In June 1865, the mayor and city council met regarding the fact that a large number of Negroes turned loose by their owners are congregating in and about Austin, as also perhaps desperate white men, making it necessary to organize a police force to deal with them. That meeting turned into the creation of what later became the Austin Police Department. In order to, quote, "deal with all able-bodied Negroes who have abandoned the service of their employers for the purpose of idleness and who are found loitering or rambling about or idly wandering about the streets or other public thoroughfares." We have across the South something called Black Codes, passed after emancipation and the end of slavery. In part, they granted slaves and freed people of color the right to enforce contracts as well as other rights, but they still maintained prohibitions for Black people to marry whites, serve on juries, hold office, or vote. We also had ways of getting people again back into the labor force, including through the apprentice law, which established in Texas allowed for the unpaid labor of minors found to be orphaned or with ill-suited parents. So those children could be taken and called vagrant minors and placed under the apprenticeship of white landowners. We've got a lot to cover here, so I wanna be mindful of the time. It's important to note the extensive number of lynchings that occurred throughout the South, including in Texas, which was often done with the active participation of law enforcement authorities, especially the Texas Rangers. You see here 4,084 lynchings in 12 southern states. 493 people were lynched in Texas during this period, and 71% of those were African American. Also want to note the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and how laws designed to control people and labor extended beyond those enslaved people to immigrants as well. In this case, Chinese laborers were banned from entering the United States, and it prevented current residents from naturalizing. In 1882, the state capitol construction occurred, and the state actually provided convict labor or convict leasing, or quote, slavery by another name, as historians refer to it. And lastly, in 1885, we see in New Orleans, following a levee worker strike, the mayor suggested to police to arrest any Black man, quote, who did not want to work. Okay, and with that, I'll hand it off to Haley.
Hi, my name is Haley Easley. I'm the executive director of the Austin. Oh,
I'm sorry to cut you off, Haley, real quick. We're gonna take a breath and come back together for a moment and talk a little bit about what we just experienced. And then Haley, after that conversation, you'll come back in and do the next piece, and then Paula, okay?
Will they be sharing this presentation out?
Maya's gonna unshare, and then we're gonna have a facilitated conversation.
Quincy, were you asking if the timeline will be shared with the public?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sorry, Quincy. Yes, it should be on the Reimagine Public Safety Task Force, the website that we have with the city. So it should be there publicly, but we can also just email it to you, Quincy. Oh, we sent it out to the task force members earlier. It might be buried in your inbox.
Yep, I'll find it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Emily and Chris, and all of the working group for compiling this information for us. We just went through many years of history in about 10 minutes, right? And I just want to acknowledge all that can come up when we do that, and just want to thank you all for bearing with us and for listening and for absorbing that. Like Kelly said, we're going to take a moment here to breathe, to kind of process a little bit collectively what it is that we just heard, and also how what we just heard applies to and informs the work that we are doing now and the work that this task force is doing moving forward. And so I want to hear, first of all, just I want to hear from a couple of folks as to what came up for you when hearing this presentation, when seeing these dates, any themes that you notice, or just anything that comes to mind. First and foremost is where I just want to start. Anything that anyone wants to share regarding what we just heard.
So Maya, for me, I really started to reflect on this, and I thought about, from a public safety standpoint, who was safe and who was not safe. And through all these two eras of history, I think about the question of who and what was being protected at the expense of whom through all of that history. And it makes me think about, as we look at the work we have to do, I still see some of the things from the 1800s still play out in our community today. It looks a little different, but I think how we reflect and do the deeper dive on who gets to be safe and who doesn't, and how that plays out in our community.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's a really important theme, and I think that's a great place to start and something that we should dive into. I'm curious to hear from the rest of the task force as if an answer to Brian's question, that in these two eras that we just discussed, who was made to be safe or unsafe? What did those themes resonate with y'all as well? Quincy. Quincy, you're muted.
You're mute.
Yep. I'll start out by saying thanks to those who worked on the presentation. Some of the information is a bit off. They say 12.5 million. That's those that they can count on the books, and that's vastly underestimated in the interest of white folks to not tell the full story about slavery. So I just want to make that statement, as well as some of the others about lynchings. Some of those lynchings that happened were what was captured on the books as well. There are some other archival documents in national Black archives around the country that gives a vastly more grim picture of the numbers of Black bodies that were destroyed by whites in that period of time. So I just want to go on record as saying that's a good first step, but we may want to dig more into those numbers if we ever have a chance to, but for the purpose of this exercise, it may not be necessary. We all know the deal. So let's keep our minds focused on stopping the destruction of Black bodies.
Real quick, Quincy, just so you know, this is an iterative process. And so we'll be welcoming folks to contribute to in the future. We had a whole thing planned out for y'all to actually contribute to the timeline, but we wanted to be able to get through it. So, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I take my hat out to them for even taking their first initial step, because some people, they walked in fear for doing this presentation, and the people who put it together, I'm giving you praise. Thank you. Because some people, they fear this information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Quincy. Are there other themes that resonated with folks, either around what Brian said around safety or something else? Nuria, yes?
Yeah, this is not new, right? Like, as we think about the history of slavery in the United States, and frankly, I come from the Caribbean and think of it there as well. You see the theme, to see it here, and I actually really echo Quincy's notions of this is really, I think, courageous as we look at this and really lean into it. And even though there may be things that iteratively we add to it or tweak from it, but to have a conversation that really speaks to history, I think is really courageous and grounds us. But to see it also is striking, because it's not, if you've been working in this space, it's not that you don't know. It is systemic. It is rooted in history. It speaks to a notion of people, not just as other, but frankly of property and how that roots forward. And so that theme has struck me thus far as we see that move through time.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point around, I don't think that anybody on this call is surprised or that this is new information, right? And so then the question is, this is not new information. Why is it important for us to ground ourselves in this history, even though it's not new information, right? And I have my ideas around why it's important, but I really want to hear from y'all around what y'all think.
So her questions were to context, right? To contextualize who was made to be safe and who was made to be unsafe during these eras, right? That was Brian's question. And then what value was placed on who and what needed to be protected, right? And then there was another question around why is it important to revisit this history and root ourselves in this information? And I want to make sure to go around and see if we can get everyone. I'm just gonna go, maybe we can just go by what's on the screen to ask if folks have something that they want, a comment, a question that they have on the timeline. The first person I see is Paula. Do you have something that you want to share about these two sections?
Sure. I guess my few thoughts are, yes, I agree with you, Quincy. I was one of the people that worked on it, but I agree with you. We were just scratching the surface. There's so much there that one, we didn't have space for, but also history is documented by those who are in power, who win, right? So getting the full numbers, the full story is more work that's worthwhile to continue to do. And then the other thought I had was just, if we imagine how this went on for so long, how it's kind of embedded into all of us, not just the systems and the formal structures, but also into our collective kind of consciousness of who we are in relation to all of this. Not maybe like we're not aware of it, maybe it's subconsciously we've all integrated this as normal and acceptable somewhere within us, and that is, as a mother, it's just disturbing for me every time that I do this process of reflection.
Thank you, Paula.
The next person, no worries, Kelly, we're all at home. The next person that I have on my screen is Kathy. If you have something to share.
Sure. I think one of the things that just particularly keeps coming back for me is the explanation, the power this has to explain something that I think I'm in the dark. That hasn't always made sense to me. And that is, why or how patrol became the core model of policing. The idea that driving around in cars, I guess, kind of hoping that you'll see crimes being done, has never made any sense to me from an efficiency standpoint. If your goal is to solve crimes and reduce crime, driving around in cars is one of those kind of not obvious choices. And I think that what this history does for me is say, patrol was a thing when the problem you were trying to solve, Black people walking around before or after curfew or whatever other Black control ordinances you were working with, maybe that problem could in fact be solved by patrol. From the perspective of the people who came up with that idea. From the perspective of us today, we're living with an idea that's rooted in a history that we have to understand in order to get past and maybe determine a different role for how law enforcement should work. I guess that's what.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kathy. If anyone else wants to jump in, please feel free. If not, I'm going to keep calling on a couple more people. And the next person that I have on my screen is Monica.
Good evening. I'm Monica Guzman with Go Austin, Vamos Austin. As they're going through it, I've seen the timelines before in other events I've done, workshops, but the one that really rings loudest is that quote from June 1865, which led to the creation of the police department. The first time I heard that quote was a council meeting a couple of months ago. And it just like, wow, You know, it's like, I want to know who said that. I want to know where they got it. So I'm glad it's in the timeline. It's a very sad history. I mean, Austin is my hometown. Born and raised here, but I also, it's not safe for a lot of people. I have friends, family members, who I honestly don't know just how much they may or may not live in fear. I have some that may have no idea what's actually going on, that they idolize law enforcement in general, or APD in particular. I know some police officers, the higher ranked ones from work I've done in the community. I have family that's in law enforcement, not here in Austin, but other parts of the state. And me personally, I'm very fortunate. I haven't had any bad dealings. Nothing terrible, but it's still very frustrating. I was going to say something. I just lost track of what it was. If it comes back to me, I'll chime in again.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Monica. And in that way, you know, I think we all know, but it bears repeating that it's also not abstract, right? And in the ways that everyone else has brought out, the ways that it's still impacting us and our communities here in Austin and around the country and around the world today. And that's also personal to us, right? So thank you so much for bringing that into the space, Monica. We're gonna do a few more. The next person I have is Assistant City Manager Ray Ariano.
Thank you, Maya. And again, Ray Ariano with the city. I didn't announce myself the last time I raised my hand. So yeah, I think for me, this information it really adds more context for myself. Personally, I certainly have heard the context, and I think we'll see it here later on in the timeline about when we actually had the charter in place that identified where people of color would live and could only be, and so forth. So this additional context certainly was something that I wasn't aware of, and helps to add again the context. And as Kathy Mitchell was saying, you know, helps provide the emphasis of, you know, how might we do things better? How might we be doing things more differently that can be a benefit to those that have experienced a different outcome from a law enforcement perspective. And so I really do appreciate the work that the team has done on this, and look forward to moving the conversation forward.
Thank you so much. And I think Farah, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Farah Muscadin, I'm the Director of the Office of Police Oversight. I want to echo the comments of the task force members and city staff that worked on this. I spent a lot of time reading it today. And my comments are really more from a personal standpoint as a Black woman, and really seeing kind of what my ancestors have gone through, and seeing that, you know, we have a group of people who were treated less than and essentially hated and treated like animals solely based on, you know, their color of skin, and to still be having conversations about, you know, anti-racism and diversity and equity and inclusion in the 21st century is a difficult pill to swallow. And so I personally wanted to just acknowledge that as much as we talk about this is out there are people who don't know this history, which should be shocking. But this history is also very triggering and difficult for probably many Black people to hear and listen to. And it's important to educate, and I think it's important to be grounded. But I just feel like I'm a Black woman first, and I need to acknowledge that this is very difficult for me personally to listen to and to hear. But on the same side of it is that it fuels my passion to do this work and for us to make a difference and make it so that the generations behind me won't be having the same conversation we've been having essentially for 300 years. Thank you, Farah.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to also call out that the second portion of our conversation that we're going to have is really tied into that because the events that we have talked about so far in the timeline happened and existed because of values, right? That certain values that were held, and what does it mean for us now moving forward to really analyze what our values are, what we want our institutional values to be, and how we can get there. And I just really thank you, Farah, for that vulnerability and for sharing that as well. The next person that I have on my screen, oh, David, yes, please go ahead, if that was a hand.
Yes, it was, and is David Johnson, he, him, his, Grassroots Leadership. You know, thank you, everyone who worked on this for putting in the work on this. And Farah, thank you for what you just said, because, you know, obviously not as a Black woman, but as a Black man, I'm feeling this in a very direct way. You know what I'm saying? And I'll even say, as a formerly incarcerated Black man who has been forced to work in the fields for TDCJ in a way very similar to that in which my ancestors were forced to work. You know what I'm saying? Like, I really appreciated Chris, when you were, I think Chris was speaking about it, but y'all were talking about that's why there's still prison labor, because that machine doesn't know how to function without slave labor, and naming that. And just the historical reference to recognize that, like, right in between the founding of APD and the peak of the Ku Klux Klan was in Texas. Black folks in Austin were hit with poll tax so that their voting rights were suppressed in a way that I think is extremely relevant when we look at what's happening today, because suppression just takes different forms. But what I'm most encouraged and empowered by in this moment is the fact that I can't remember ever seeing a city in Texas, a major city in Texas, host and broadcast a conversation like this as part of its operations. And I'm not trying to give Austin a pat on the back because it hasn't earned it yet. But I do want to say, like, this is something that is encouraging to me, because the entire time this meeting has been going, I've been sending links to it to everyone I've known that I've already sent links to anyway, just reminding them, like, yes, right now, in direct response to what the community cried out for, we're talking about the way that slavery and the white supremacy that is the DNA of slavery, how it has perpetuated into our current life and our modern day ideal of what life should be. That's a very important thing, and I think it touches to what Quincy said earlier. Like, nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to have these conversations. Nobody wants to lean into the discomfort here. But that said, one thing I want to say is that I think that this also brings to, like, the public some substance with regard to why people say defund APD, why people say that slavery was never abolished, it just evolved. Like, this is bringing some substance to the matter, because people ask questions and say, well, why can't we, and why shouldn't we, or why should we? And this is forcing this conversation in a very public forum so that individuals can, like, start feeding themselves to move forward in discussions about why transformative instead of punitive, why abolition is an option, things of that nature. And so this moment makes me proud in that regard.
Real quick before we go to the next person, thank you, David. I was just gonna say, based on what Farah shared, and normally we do this, we usually share a trigger warning to warn people before we look at something like this, and we share something like this, that there's gonna be images and there's gonna be, you're gonna be hearing things that could re-traumatize or trigger you. So take care of yourself if you need to at this time. We thought that it was very important, or the community folks that put this together really thought that it was important to root ourselves, to understand the foundation that we have to root out in order to get this right. So we thought it was worthwhile, similar to what Farah said. I just wanted to put that out there real quick.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, David, also. And I think that everything that David said is, I really want us to return to some of the things that he was speaking about after we go through this next portion that will take us closer to the present. So let's really kind of hold on to those comments that were made and try to return to them. I have time for one more person and before we go on to that next section. So let's see, the next person I have is Carrie.
Yes, thank you. I don't have any comments.
Okay, thank you. Then with that, we will go on and I will pass it over to Haley.
Okay, so this is Haley Easley, and I'm going to be talking about the reform era, which is from the early 1900s to the 1970s, where we see an attempt to remake the police as quote unquote professionals. So this progressive era, these reforms led to so-called quote unquote kinder, gentler system and reforms of local corruption and city governments. Police departments became more disciplined and hierarchical as a result. Progressive reforms also led to innovations like probation and parole systems, legalizing bureaucratic state intrusion into people's homes, and urban professional social services and public housing were also invented. And they often worked in tandem with these new reformed government systems. And these include things like child welfare and juvenile courts. So in April of 1906, the Austin City Council passed an ordinance requiring segregated seating on all streetcars operated by Austin's Electric Railway. This spurred a boycott from Austin's Black community and the organizing of hack lines, so mule-drawn and auto alternatives to streetcars for Black riders. The boycott collapsed by the time the ordinance officially went into effect on June 11th. Austin police officers were told to arrest and fine any Black people who were making attempts to dissuade their peers from riding in segregated cars. In 1908, Austin Police Chief W.J. Morris issued an order that all Black people found idle without work should be arrested and fined with vagrancy. In response to the large demand for cotton pickers, the police department at the time decided that Black Austinites had to choose between pleasant work in the cotton fields or find city employment. Over subsequent years, Black gathering sites were raided regularly by police looking to arrest Black quote unquote loafers. So in August 22, 1919, John, I'm not quite sure how to say this name, but Shalady, Secretary of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People for New York, so that's the NAACP, was severely beaten near the Driscoll Hotel and forced to leave Austin by County Judge Dave Pickle, Constable Charles Hamby, and Ben Pierce. The attack followed a morning meeting with Shalady and representatives of the Austin chapter of the NAACP, so that's the National Association. As Shillity was returning to his hotel, Hamby, Hamby stopped him to ensure he was not stirring up, quote unquote, stirring up more trouble than Austin citizens will be able to get rid of in 10 years. When Shillity responded, "You don't see my point of view," Hamby responded by striking him in the eye and saying, "I'll fix it so you can't see." Shillity was continuously beaten by Hamby, Pickle, and Pierce, and then immediately brought to the train depot and forced to leave the city. So when the NAACP asked Texas Governor W.P. Hobby what efforts were made to punish these three men, Hobby responded, "Your organization can contribute more to the advancement of both races by keeping your representatives and their propaganda out of this state." Austin police ordered the disbanding of the local branch of the NAACP on the grounds that the association had no permit to do business in Texas. In the same time period in the 1920s, the Austin Police Department call logs document white officers consistently using the N-word to describe Black community members. So in 1924, the town marshal system in Austin ended and was officially replaced by the Austin Police Department. So moreover, the position of the head of police also changed from an elected office to one appointed by the mayor. After spending a year in the basement of the county courthouse, the police department moved from City Hall into new quarters at the recently built municipal building. In that same year, there's a Ku Klux Klan revival in Austin. So membership in Austin peaked that year with about 3,000 to 5,000 members. So this means 1 in 10 of the native-born white population of Travis County. The Austin chapter of the Women of the KKK was formed December 1923. So between September 1921 and March 1924, the city hosted 2 Klan parades, 2 large public gatherings, 4 mass initiation rallies, a week-long circus, and public screenings. Travis County Sheriff W.D. Miller admitted to belonging to the organization, as did Austin City Council member and Superintendent of Police and Public Safety John D. Copeland, and Chief of Detectives E.L. Young, among other APD officers. So 4 years later, 1928, a master plan legally designated East Austin as a Negro district, quote unquote. As de jure segregation was illegal in Texas, planners used zoning as separate, quote unquote, separate but equal legislation. They also simply just removed African-American services such as schools, parks, and libraries from neighborhoods designated as white, as well as services for Mexican Americans. So in 1933, federal lending policy formalized redlining. So all of Austin's predominantly Black and brown communities were classified as high-risk zones where mortgage loans were denied, excluding the people in these communities from one of the most significant efforts to build household wealth in the US history. 1942 to 1946, we see the Japanese internment. So we see between 110 and 120,000 people of Japanese descent, 62% who were citizens of America, forced out of their homes and imprisoned in inland government camps. This internment relied on collaboration between different authorities, including the executive branch, the military, Census Bureau, and the local police. 1946, the Austin Police Academy begins. The first Black officer to enter the academy was John Dudley Annison in February 1947. However, he was not allowed to arrest white people and could not carry a gun. 1950, we see schools begin creating their own security forces to crack down on property destruction and vandalism. And in the 1950s, we see the emergence of the civil rights movement. So folks used civil disobedience strategically in national campaigns, which includes nonviolent protesters, most of them who were Black, and they were routinely met with violence. In the 1960s and 70s, police across the country are able to start forming unions. So state concessions to police create further unity up and down the police hierarchy. In 1961, Southern Freedom Riders were met with police violence, notably in Birmingham, Alabama, where riders were arrested and removed. When they returned on Mother's Day of that year, they were beaten by Klansmen while police looked away. In 1965, the marches from Selma to Montgomery were organized by nonviolent activists to demonstrate the desire of African American citizens to exercise their constitutional right to vote in defiance of the segregationist repression. They were part of a broader voting rights movement underway in Selma and throughout the American South. At the first march, state troopers and county posse men attacked unarmed marchers with billy clubs and tear gas, and the event eventually became known as Bloody Sunday. So in 1968, there was police repression of protests in the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and even though people were injured and killed, this was an important watershed in that police mob violence was captured on camera and distributed internationally. And even the Chicago police were forced to admit things got quote unquote out of control. And the following year, we see the murder of Fred Hampton, where the FBI worked with the Chicago police to commit the premeditated murder of the Black Panther Party leader, Fred Hampton, in his house on the South Side when he was 21 years old. So now I'm going to pass it on to Paola.
Thank you. Thank you, Haley, for that. Yes. So I am going to cover the fourth era, which is the 1970s to the present. My name is Paula Rojas. He, her, ella pronouns. I am representing communities.
Paula, could you speak closer to the mic?
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I am representing Communities of Color United for Racial Justice, CCU. My section on the timeline, if you see, is very long, and I know we're getting towards the end of the meeting, so I'm going to read very selectively, but I encourage all of us here and those who are watching us to take the time later to read the full timeline. We're going to share it with everyone. The city's going to share it with everyone, but it's something to read with your family, read with your children, read with your friends, and really think about. So I'm going to jump in. Let's go to 1971 here in Austin. Austin city leaders adopted the Gentlemen's Agreement behind closed doors, reserving one spot on the city council for a Black person and one spot for a Latinx person. The first African-American council member, Beryl Hancock, in the 20th century was elected in 1971. The first Latinx member of the city council, John Trevino, was elected in 1975. There's many examples of violence at the hands of the police, but that I won't read them all, but I'm going to read a few. On July 31st, 1971, 16-year-old Joe Cedillo Jr. was shot 6 times and killed by police as he ran from the scene of a burglary at an East Austin grocery store. Despite community protesting efforts, a grand jury report ruled the incident as a justifiable homicide, and the 2 officers involved in the shooting were reinstated. 1972, Austin grassroots organizations, here we have an image, the Black Citizens Task Force and the Austin chapter of the Brown Berets were grassroots-led organizations formed in order to combat racism in Austin, including police brutality. Now I'm going to jump to the 80s. Let's look at 1982, 1983. The KKK marches across Texas. In 1982, the Bastrop chapter of the KKK threatened violence and death to members of the Black Citizens Task Force and the Brown Berets. In 1983, the KKK marched across Texas, and police in Austin attacked counter-protesters with excessive force. Okay, now I'm going to move to the 90s. Let's look at 1990s. Years of research and activism led to the popularization of the term racial profiling to describe police practices targeting people of color. Police departments were forced to start seeing racial profiling as an issue and in some cases address the issue through policy changes, though not always with practice. Okay. Another thing in the 1990s, East Austin community groups organized to improve the quality of life of East Austin residents. They successfully closed a toxic waste dump, the tank farm, a hazardous waste landfill, and the Holly Power Plant. In 2003, their organizing led the City Council to rezone over 600 properties in East Austin from industrial to less intense use classifications, making the East Side a safer and more attractive place to live. This paved the way for gentrification of the East Side. Now I'm going to jump to the late 90s, 1998, smart growth and gentrification. I'm trying to remember to not speak too quickly for the interpreters. Austin's city government adopted the Smart Growth Initiative and established a desired development zone comprised mostly of the area east of I-35, earmarking East Austin for rapid gentrification. And let's move to the 2000s. The new urbanism of Austin consisted of young white flight to cities rather than to the suburbs, pushing people of color out of near to city center neighborhoods like 78702, one of the most highly gentrified and whitened zip codes in the US. Gentrification of the East Side was the reason that amongst the 10 fastest growing cities in the US, Austin was the only one to experience a decline in its African American population between 2000 and 2010. Okay. While that was happening nationally in 2001, we had September 11th, which changed the face of policing and surveillance at both a national and a local level and impacted us here in Austin. Then let's move ahead. June 14th, 2003, Jesse Lee Owens Jr. was shot 5 times at close range and killed by Austin police officer Scott Glasgow. Glasgow was initially charged for criminally negligent homicide, but the charge was later dropped. In his 3-year tenure, he filed 23 use of force reports, far more than most officers. Each of the suspects was Black or Latinx. That's 2003. From there, I wanted us to jump to 2011. Austin police officer Nathan Wagner fatally shot Byron Carter Jr. Officer Wagner and Officer Jeffrey Rodriguez followed Carter and his teenage friends because they thought they were acting suspiciously. Officer Wagner fired at their car after they sped off, fatally wounding Carter, who was in the passenger seat. That same year, 2011, the Austin office of the Police Monitor reported that Black and Latinx residents were more likely to be searched during a traffic stop than whites. Traffic stops resulted in a search 1 out of 8 times for Black drivers and 1 out of 10 times for Hispanics, but only 1 out of 28 times for white residents. This is 2011. Then I want to jump to 2015. The Martin Prosperity Institute issued a report that identified the Austin metro area as the most economically segregated metro area in the United States. So this is some of the context that we're living in. And same year, Austin had the 4th highest total number of people fatally shot by police in the nation. This is 2015, according to an analysis by the Guardian newspaper. The report showed Austin had 6 deaths caused by police in 2015, the same as in New York City. May 2017, I wanted to Texas banned sanctuary cities with SB 4. The law requires all Texas law enforcement agencies to comply with U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement and would punish local government entities for not enforcing federal immigration laws. SB 4 requires local law enforcement to direct resources such as jail space, officers on duty time, and local tax dollars to work that traditionally had been responsibility of the federal government. And then in 2018, the city, yeah, did someone say something? Hello? The City of Austin Office of Police Oversight was created in the lead up to approving a new contract with the Austin Police Association. After nearly a year of negotiations, City Council members unanimously approved a 4-year and $44.6 million contract between the city and the local police union. Some police reform activists celebrated the contract as a step towards more transparency, including the ability to file complaints online and anonymously, which was not a possibility before. And I want to end with 2020. Let's go to 2020. The Racial Profiling Report. Analysis of APD's traffic stop data by the Equity Office, the Office of Police Oversight, and the Innovation Office from 2015 to 2018 showed that Austin police officers disproportionately stop and arrest African Americans and Latinos. African Americans made up 15% of the stops, 25% of the arrests, and less than 8% of the adult population. Latinx folks made up 33% of the stops, 43% of the arrests, and 31% of the adult population. The analysis also showed that arrests due to traffic stops were disproportionately concentrated in East Austin, while warnings were concentrated in West Austin. And I guess to bring us to this moment, right now, community organizations here in Austin this year launched a campaign to replace public safety leadership in Austin, including the chief of police, the assistant chiefs of police, and an assistant city manager. The city manager created a city community reimagining task force, which is us, centering voices most impacted by police violence. City council also voted to reduce the $431 million APD budget by approximately $21 million, with an additional $130 million marked for this reimagining process, which brings us to where we are today. So we can stop sharing the timeline if you want. And I want to hand it off back to our facilitators And for me, as someone that just read this, really recognizing that all of this history was not neutral in terms of values, was not values neutral. There was definitely values leading the way. So I'm interested in us thinking about where we pick up from there. So Maya and Kelly.
Thanks, Paula. And so now I'm gonna ask questions like we did in the last session about values. what are some of the values that we saw demonstrated in this history? And what do we want to see demonstrated in the new history that we're creating with this process? And I'll just call on folks that so that we can get it moving. Sure.
Kelly, this is Chaz. I had one question.
Mhm.
First of all, I want to, echo what everybody else has been saying. Thank you to the folks that worked on this. But I'm curious as to how you all decided what information would be on the timeline and what wouldn't be on the timeline, right? Because when I think of policing in Austin, I think of the Cedar Street incident, right? Right, like it's crazy to me that didn't make the timeline because it was that incident. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking at Kelly.
You're right. Why we have
the
police monitor's office.
Yeah. Which is all a part of this. So I'm just curious as to I also didn't see Sophia King. Like it's a lot of names on this list that I'm just curious as to how you all picked and choose what made the timeline. But to also be a good student after being a not so good student of going around the question, I'm looking forward to hopefully Austin becoming an example of investing in community solutions so we can see different outcomes, right? To answer your question about what I would like to see, because I think we've seen this very extensive timeline from like the inception of quote unquote policing. It has always been this thing to police and capture and kill Black and brown bodies and poor folks. So I'm looking forward to us really and hopefully truly pulling away from that idea and investing into not even new community ideas, right? Like ideas that community folks have been doing. If you go back long enough, like it's just a part of our culture and heritage, and really uplifting that and investing in that and saying no more with this. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chaz. And just to answer your question, Sophia King is on there, but we didn't put the Cedar Street incident, and we probably should have. I mean, we should have, and we can go back and add it. If you don't know, that was an incident that actually a staff member of the city was there the day it happened, and so yeah, we'll add it moving forward. I won't go into it right now, but it is very important.
Just thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for that. And I see the Sophia King thing. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you checking for that though. I appreciate that. As somebody from Austin, I really appreciate that. Does anybody, well, I'll call on someone else. We haven't heard from Assistant City Manager Chris Shorter. You looked interested on the Zoom, so I'm gonna call on you just to hear about.
Of course, I'm interested.
Right.
Right. It is hard. Let me step back and say that for many of the folks from community on this task force, it's hard to imagine that you do what you do without love for this city and a heart for seeing this city be better. And for those who are in public service, it is hard to imagine that you have not come into this work because you have heart for wanting to see our city serve its residents better. It is difficult to look at this timeline and to see all of the impacted lives from the very beginning and where you all started to present day. And like Chaz mentioned, obviously there is a lot of pieces that we just didn't, the folks who put this together didn't have the ability to fit it all in. But I just want to say thank you for taking the time. It is powerful to call this out and to say it again and again. And I guarantee that there are some folks on this line, on this call, And there are folks who will look at this video later who just did not know. And so it is important that we take time to call this history out, especially the earlier days of this history where the structure of the policing apparatus was developed. So that said, to answer your question, Kelly, in terms of values, what I am hoping to see here and experience is what has led to this conversation, and that is a community voice and what community policing and with a mind towards health and making sure that we bring mental health and substance use and other services to the forefront where our community needs it to be at the forefront. And so I appreciate again very much that you all took the time to put this together. It really means a lot to me, and I hope to everyone else on this task force. Many of you know some of this history, but there are so many others who don't. And so, Kelly, if you saw that in my facial reactions, that's what you saw.
I appreciate it, and I think others do as well on the task force. Real quick, I know we are constrained for time, but we really want to make sure that we get a few more voices in, and just ask for some grace around time tonight. I see that Amanda Lewis's hand is up. And actually, she was the next person that I was going to call on. So Amanda.
All right, thank you. Sorry, it's really dark where I am. I just wanted to, I think, echo what everyone else has said. I think I'm feeling the history very deeply. And I think about, I have a lot of personal thoughts and a lot to process. And I'm just so grateful for our task force and just the membership of the folks that are at the table here doing this work, to be holding so much of what our city has experienced. And I think for city staff to just listen, and for folks that maybe are not understanding why people are talking about defunding police or prioritizing other community services, for them not to understand kind of this connection. I hope that it really resonates. And I also hope that we can check in with folks that have questions, or folks that maybe are watching this and want a deeper analysis. So I'm hoping that there's ways that folks can plug in. I just wanted to say, a friend of mine was watching this as well, and their comment was, I hope that cadets get this education. And so, I think when we go into discussions about what police officers are being trained to do, that we can talk about, do they get this history? Do they understand this lens? Is there other lenses that people understand policing that are contradictory to this? And how do we get on the same page? And I think this is a start to that. But as I was thinking, I was like, of course, I understand this, but who is this kind of information getting to the right people that are in a position to really change their own behaviors? And I think that kind of goes to one of our items, which is police training.
Thank you, Amanda. And I'll say real quick, I know that the Office of Police Oversight created a curriculum actually to go into the Cadet Academy around the history of policing in the United States and in Austin. And I was going to call on real quick Matt Simpson, and then I see your hand up too, Alicia and Quincy. Y'all are in my stack. So after Matt, we'll go to Alicia, and then we'll go to Quincy, and then I think we're going to try to figure out what next steps look like. Okay. Hi, Matt.
So thank you so much. I will just say quickly, my one big takeaway, along with obviously everything everybody said, but what we're doing is really historic, an historic moment in the city of Austin. And this presentation for me really brought it home. What we're doing is something that's important. And a lot of it should have happened a long time ago, but we're here to make it happen now. And that, Beth, I'll just stop there. Yeah, it's a historic moment.
Thank you. Thank you. It is definitely historic. So I said, then we'd have Alicia. And then Quincy, you're after Alicia.
I think she might have gotten dropped off again. So maybe we can go to Quincy and hopefully she can come back in. And
okay. Quincy?
Kelly, yes.
Oh, wait.
No, go ahead, Alicia. I defer to you.
I'm so sorry. I would try I was just having some tech issues here. The two things is that I wanted to highlight how connecting the first part to the second part, overall, how to not repeat myself, appreciative of the intentionality that went into this presentation exercise, and appreciative of everybody who this is very triggering for allowing us, everybody else, to be in this space. But really how something that Paula, I wanted to highlight something that I believe it was Paula that mentioned it, how it's something that very formalized. I mean, going back to the basic questions at the beginning of what was being protected, which was property, and what was being policed, right? Which was the Black body, and then as the years go, it's Black and Latinx communities and in those towns, and yet what continues to still just be protected is property, and how a lot of that just stayed and resonated with a lot of what we saw during the uprisings, and the things that for me feel, as someone that lives in Riverside, what I feel, the reason why I see we're one of the most policed 2-mile radius in all of Austin is just to protect a property that is ever more so becoming more enticing to gentrifiers or to folks that are coming in and wanting to redevelop, right, this area. And so I wanted to really say that I am really hoping, and everybody keeps bringing up, right, how what a historical moment, or that the kind of conversation that we're having. And for me, what would make naturally most sense is for us to continue moving with this intentionality and this pace. Yes, it does not feel comfortable to moving this slow when there is a lot of urgency as directly impacted people. But at the same time, I think you have to acknowledge that these are hard conversations, which process needs to be allowed for. And that for me, one of the values that I do hope we bring in, right, which was obviously has not been present throughout history, is really centering those that are most directly impacted.
Alicia, we lost her again, I think.
Sorry, I would just close off. I hope that one of the values that we move forward with is really centering the voice, but not just the voice, the experiences of the folks that are survivors of police violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. And now we're going to hear from Quincy Dunlap.
I'll try to be brief, Kelly. You asked about values earlier. I value
Speak your mind. You have
the honesty. I value the accurate information, and I value the intention of what we will do, granted the necessary action and the follow through. So I'll ask for a couple of things, and when I say I'm speaking in the universal Black body voice. There are pieces of information missing. I would ask that this timeline be a living document. So as we speak to a cross-generational approach to understanding policing, we won't miss a historical, current, or future context to this. I'll also ask that when we consider the question of what they were protecting, I want to stop. And I'm speaking from my perspective, there is a minimization of the protection of Euro white privilege. And I want to make sure we acknowledge that that's what they're protecting and not necessarily property. The property is a secondary thought. They're protecting the Euro white privilege of white Americans in a space where they feel entitled to. So I want to acknowledge it in that way so that we never lose context of what they were protecting and what they were destroying. And I'll end and then hold my comment further until the next time we meet.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Quincy. And I'm going to close out this piece. I want to thank everyone for participating. And we try to bring in as many voices as we could into that critical conversation, especially to just buttress our conversation around values, right? And so Maya and I can go in and sort of pull out some of that as well, moving forward in the work that we're doing about what we want to see and what we're moving out of, right? And now I'll pass it to Maya for next steps.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Kelly. So we really just want to make sure that we end here in the next 10 or so minutes. Kathy, I'll go to you next. Talking about what next steps will be. And Paula, yes. The last piece of our agenda is discussion for the agenda for next meeting, as is in the governing document that that y'all should discuss the agenda for the next meeting, with the caveat that we do not have to finalize the agenda in the meeting. We need to propose. We have our new co-chairs who can also do that work to just make sure that it's cohesive and finalized. But I do want to create that space right now. If you have an agenda item or something that you want to make sure is addressed for the next meeting, or that we hear and that the co-chairs here to take to create the agenda, I'm going to create that space now. And so I'll go to Kathy and then Paula, and then if anyone else, put your hand up.
Yeah, I'd actually like to propose two things. I'd like to propose the creation of a work group on 911. The work group should be able to continue the data investigation that the city has started, interview people from cities that have a separate 911 call system, and start to explore the kinds of things that do not require a police response. That's sort of what I would envision as the scope of that work group. And then second, I would like to propose that 911 be on our agenda for next time, including a presentation from the city on progress towards moving 911 out of APD, and possibly, if it's available, if the right people are available, an update on our progress in mental health first response, identifying and putting in place alternative first responders.
Thank you, Kathy. Paula?
Well, I had some thoughts, but I think it would be great to hear if others, what others would like to see as priority for that next agenda. I was gonna, maybe I can just lay out some thoughts of how we could do it, and then hear what makes sense, as I'm now gonna be one of the co-chairs with Brian. I guess I had thought that maybe we could spend some time in the beginning of the next meeting to really deepen this conversation about values. So have Kelly and Maya pull out what they got from this debrief, but really have a time to together create some shared values for this task force that will be our compass guiding our work. This is what I thought we could do in the beginning. Then that we should develop the working groups, because we do want to get to the working groups. So definitely what Kathy's proposing, but maybe there's other working groups that we can come ready to propose, is something I'm proposing to you all, so that then we could start to break off into those work groups. And then lastly, I just wanted to say about this timeline. I'm a midwife, and I was the one that proposed, let's do this historical timeline. And I've been a part of developing a timeline around reproductive health since slavery and colonization in the US. And it's a process that I've been a part of for years to develop this timeline. And here we did this in a really, really quick way because we wanted to get it going. But it's definitely needs so much more to fully represent what we want to represent. So I thought maybe that there could be another piece of work that's continuing to grow this timeline intentionally, and also thinking about where and how to share it, not just on the city website, but how do we print it, make posters, make handouts, do something that kind of helps us encourage our communities, all of our communities, to really wrestle with this in a deeper way. So those are some of the thoughts I had, and I'm gonna see what do people think we should prioritize for next meeting, which is 2 weeks away.
I believe I saw a raised hand up. Is that correct? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you, Maya. So I know that we spent some time earlier on in one of our early meetings about priorities and different topic areas. I think it would be very helpful to see what the results of those were. I know that we collected the information and can help inform, that Kathy just mentioned 911 as an interest area. I'd be interested to see, again, what the effort was from that poll, and it may inform kind of where the work groups might be formed as well when we have this conversation.
Yes. So real quick, Ray, Maya and I are actually working to theme out the priorities document and come up with some. I think that Kathy wanted to get the 911 working group rolling, as to have something for next meeting. And then Paula's proposal is that we have a values conversation at the top of next meeting, a short one after Maya and I work our magic, and see if we can approve some values, so a compass to work from. And then Maya and I can also share out those themes so that folks can decide which working groups they'd like to join. Was kind of is what I was hearing. And then I think we have Nuria, then it was Farah, then it was Chris Harris, then it was Haley. And I think I saw Chris Shorter's actual hand go up. Is that everyone? Okay.
Thanks, Kelly. And I'm happy to defer to the will of the task force as we move forward. I want to just offer as we think about this work, we wanted to ground ourselves in history, but we also said we wanted to ground ourselves in data. So I appreciate, Kathy, your conversation about 911. We will be ready. We did send you all a note that if you want anything, any additional lines of inquiry, please send us that way. We can, and depending on how this group votes, we can at least form the working group so that we can get that work moving, and happy to tag staff as appropriate. And whether or not we have all of that ready for the next 2 weeks because we're coming, don't know, but we can at least get that working group moving and perhaps report back, depending on what other pieces of today's conversations and proposals are accepted on by the task force.
Thank you, Nuria. And then we had Farah next.
Yeah, my only comment is I don't want to lose the momentum from this conversation, but I do think that we do need to kind of get to work. So I'm just, in response to Paula's question, can this be done simultaneously? Can we continue the values conversation, but also, because we have some pending work groups. I mean, the work group that put this together could continue, and I know we have a facilitators work group. And so I would just like us to, just have a parallel approach of getting to some more substantive work that the task force can get to.
Thanks, Farah. And then we had Haley next.
Hi, I just wanted to get some clarification, and I don't know if, I guess we should do this next time on what this committee is responsible for. So I think that, just looking at the budget highlights that Nuria sent us, like, there's the decoupling versus reimagining versus reinvestment. I just want to make sure I understand where, like, what we're responsible for and what is going to move on with or without our input.
I'm happy to respond to that. I think we did this at a previous meeting, and I don't know if that got lost, Haley, but I think the way in which we have thought about it and the way we had presented to council, both pre-budget and post-budget, and to this task force was there are areas that as a city we can move forward administratively and think about, and a lot of that was under kind of the decoupling. What could be separated, what could be thought differently, and really the reimagining conversation is a broader one that we really wanted to hear community voice about. How do we envision services in a different way? How do we show up when people are in need? And some of those will relate to each other. So for example, the 911 conversation, I think it's the example I used last time we spoke. Certainly there is a conversation about whether or not we can take 911 and move that separately, whether it should be a single stop call center, whether there are other models that we can think about, and how administratively we do that, right? Like there's, civil service roles, and we got to look at sort of folks and their individuals that are in those positions, and we got to make sure we have conversations. That is separate from perhaps a broader conversation, really delving into the 911 data and the conversation about how are calls received, how are calls dispatched, who else could those calls be routed to, who could respond in a different way. That is a conversation we are hoping not just the task force, but certainly the task force, but community as well, as we continue to ask questions about how community is re-envisioning in those scenarios. So that is really an area of thoughtful reimagining versus kind of the direction of how do we move organizationally structures around, because that's just a matter of looking, a lot of talking to people and talking to staff, thinking what's appropriate, and then figuring out how to do that administratively. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that you had said that earlier on in the process, and I saw a presentation on it, and it just seemed a lot more segregated. And so I just wanted to make sure that nothing was changed, or if there's not a new direction.
No.
Okay.
Thank you. And then I see you, Carrie. You're after Chris Shorter. I think we're gonna go to Chris Harris, and then Chris Shorter, and then you, Carrie.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I guess I want to weigh in support of both the proposals so far, but also maybe throw in a little augmentation on it. So, I do see good reason to continue this conversation, as well as to get into the work. But actually, I just don't see the conversation about working groups being something that we need to do in a meeting format. And so I'm wondering if, given that we've already submitted our priorities, if our facilitators, along with our new co-chairs, can use that to propose or have us help work out in the interim what those working groups might be, and such that maybe we're even able to meet with these working groups and have an initial report back the next time that we meet. Rather than us sitting here trying to figure out which working groups and who's going to be in them and all that. It seems like work that should be done offline. And then when we're here, we can be reporting back about things that we want to focus on, information that we need back from city and other stakeholders, as well as plans that we have for reaching out to and connecting with and hearing from the community at large about what their priorities are in this process. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I do think that, and lastly, that 911 is an understandable place to start as far as receiving information or report backs, provided that the city's ready to do that. But I also, like I said, I think conversations about those working groups is something maybe best suited for an offline conversation. But I would like to hear from the city about their potential capacity to do a report back about 911 in the near term.
Thank you, Chris. And now that's another proposal on the table, is that we have the two that Paula and Kathy brought in. And then Chris is saying that potentially creating the working groups offline in some way, so that we're not using that time together on that. And so maybe that's something that staff, me and Maya, can provide support in as well. And I think it's Chris Shorter's turn.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kelly, and actually agree with Chris Harris that some of this work can be done offline. I will say that I was about to propose a working group, though, and I want to go ahead and do that anyway. As we talk, and certainly building off what Nuria mentioned, I feel like policing in parks, particularly, it is a critical shared space in our city. And when disputes or misunderstandings occur, oftentimes it doesn't necessarily rise to the level where there's a need for a uniformed officer. And I feel like it is a right conversation for us to talk about how we share that space and what role community could play when there is misunderstanding about how we share the space that doesn't necessarily involve calling 911 or calling a police officer. So I wanted to propose starting a task force around, not a task force, a working group around parkland in particular, but other shared space.
All right. So we have a proposal for a working group around parks and policing. Are there folks who are, well, I'm not sure if we should, any member can propose a working group. And so I think now we just need folks to join that working group. Are there folks who want to volunteer to join that working group with Chris?
Well, I think because we've had now several conversations about priorities, Kelly, what I want to suggest is that maybe as an item, an actionable item on our next meeting agenda, that we come with a comprehensive list. That way folks aren't volunteering one-off for working groups, but instead they see a full list of where we are right now and can make some decisions based on the time that they have.
That sounds great. Okay, so we'll have that on the next meeting, a longer list, the one that Maya and I are proposing, so that people can choose. And then there was Carrie, and I see your hand too, Kathy.
Sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say both Chris's covered. I was wondering what the process was for, suggesting work group topics, but secondly, what the plans were for, community involvement and conversations in this going forward, or if that's something, to be worked out by the co-chairs offline and report back. But to Kathy and Chris's point too, I have some interest in suggesting, some topics for work groups as well.
Okay. Thank you, Carrie. I think what we'll do is have people email the facilitators and the co-chairs their ideas about work groups, and we'll add those into the ones that were all proposed, as well as the ones that Maya and I sort of theme out from the priorities list. Does that sound okay? Okay. And go ahead, Kathy. I remember you had your hand up.
Well, I'm feeling a little like the 911 piece, I think, is probably uncontroversial. I don't know that people can figure out if they want to be on this work group, but like I know I'm going to volunteer to be on it. So I'm hesitating because, you know, I kind of feel like I want to make a motion and just have it voted right now, so that if people want to then start talking about the 911 stuff, we can start the ball rolling. And it kind of already is. So my concern is I don't want the spirit of this task force to get left out of a dialogue that's going to occur in the world anyway. And I feel like what we're bringing to that dialogue is something important. So I guess I'm convincing myself to just make a motion. So I'm going to make a motion to create a 911 working group. And
we suspended the Roberts rules. Remember, Kathy?
Yeah, we got rid of that like an hour ago.
Yeah.
So nobody can say yes. We can't.
I mean, we can, but it technically, since we suspended the rules, you know what I mean? So I think, and I'm looking at my our co-chairs now. I think they can take what you're saying in consideration, but I mean, or we could just agree, but I absolutely agree. I think because the 911 piece is moving in real time.
Can y'all say more about that? Can y'all talk about how 911 is moving in real time? And I know we don't have a lot of time. It's 8:28, y'all.
Yeah. So I'll try to say this in 1 minute. And I'm looking at Nuria and the rest of the city. I just assume that the 911 piece is probably one of the most important pieces in that decoupling deck. And I would assume that the city is very willing, I don't want to say anxious, but very willing to do something with that as soon as they can. And I also think the 911 piece is something that a lot of people in the community, just based on some of the misinformation that we've heard already, is very anxious to hear about, right? Because we've seen the people that are anti what we're trying to do already attack, the 911 piece specifically. So I think if the city could come back and talk about some of their proposals, some of the ideas, and we can do the work group stuff in the meantime, while Brian and Paola do what they need to do. I would vote for that, even though we can't vote right now.
So Chaz, if you will, and I'm sorry I'm jumping in, but since we suspended rules, I'm jumping in for a moment because of 911. So I would say this, that you're right. We are anxiously delving into 911. We had the presentation at the Public Safety Commission. We assumed we would come to this task force and do even a deeper dive with you all, with the folks that presented, so that you could ask questions, say where there's not enough, push us to continue to really go deeper as we do that. So we will be happy to bring that forward. I know that Carrie in the Innovation Office is lurking and listening at some point, so she knows we're moving forward. But PD and CTM and other folks that are working on this. So we can be ready to present something, and hopefully what that will do is help give additional work to staff as we're looking at 911, that it will solidify what sort of the working group will continue to look at as that moves forward. Certainly can provide an update at any point. I can't ever guarantee that we'll have finished the work by the time that we provide an update, but I am always happy to share where we are, because there's a lot of work happening. as we move forward. And so whether it is the entire meeting that is dedicated to that next time, or whether, as Paula suggested, there is a space in which to at least debrief, reflect, and think about the continuation of this really, I think, important historic timeline and continued work on that, because I know that the group that was working on it had thoughts about how do we sustain it and how do we keep growing that. Maybe there is some space in the beginning to just acknowledge that, and then we can certainly dive into 911. So if that is the will of the group, know that we can be ready with that.
Is there any dissent? I know we're not formally voting, but is that okay with people?
It's okay from my perspective, since we're just kind of jumping in out of line.
Yes, I'm glad to hear your voice, Dawn. Thank you.
Yes, I am in support of that, and I was standing ready to second Kathy's motion. It is work that is moving along. I think we have plenty of information we can bring back to the group, start working on it. I would like to see the work group formed so that we can, get moving in that area. But there's so much work to do, and this one is already kind of starting to produce, right? And so we want to take advantage of the data that is collected and kind of look at the systems that have already been reviewed, and then put our stamp on it. Because I agree with Kathy, we don't want it to get too far ahead of this group having an opportunity to have input.
Okay. And so for folks that want to join that group, I think what we're going to have to do is just send some things out electronically, and give folks the information so that they can join that group. And then when we come back next time, we can have all of the proposed working groups on the table for people to decide whether or not they want to join. And we can have some information from the 911 folks that Nuria proposed, and maybe a tiny little conversation about values. Does that sound okay? And then from here on out, we'll have the coaches work with you all and work with Patricia and the agenda together. Because remember, in our governance doc, we said that we wanted to have this available to the public. So, I just wanted to craft that up because we don't have a lot of time. We would have 2 days, 14 days until the next meeting. So that gives us 2 days to come up with that agenda. Is that okay with everybody? Some folks are off camera, but we good? Okay. I see you, Priscilla. You got something you want to add?
No, I was just trying to listen. Farrah needs to mute. Farrah, can you mute yourself?
She got her little dark. Maybe that's what that is.
No, yeah, it sounds like something else, but that's okay.
Okay.
I was just like focusing, like I'm trying to hear you.
All right. So with that, I'm going to try to close it up. And remind folks, our next meeting is on November 5th at the same time. And to email us your ideas about working groups in the meantime. We will send out the proposed agenda. And what else? I want to thank the interpreters and our tech folks and staff. Good job. I want to thank the task force members, of course. Thank y'all for showing up. And the community folks and staff that worked on the timeline. It was really good. And we're going to keep it a living document as we agreed. If you have any questions or need clarification, just reach out to any of the city staff or your co-chairs, Paula Rojas and Brian Oaks.
Thank you, facilitators. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all take care, okay?
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, Sean.